I'm Dr. John Gartner.
And I'm Dr. Harry Segal.
And welcome to another session of Shrinking Trump.
Yes, relax, lie down on the couch, and let us help you understand your response to this terrible world we're living in, especially under the regime of Donald Trump, who sadly has had a very good week, winning in really almost every venue. Even though I think he's sowing the seeds of his own destruction, which is typical of people with his severe personality disorder, something we call malignant narcissism. John and I are both clinical psychologists. We've been talking about Donald Trump and his mental illness and the way it affects his thinking, his behavior, and also fuels his wish to be a dictator, which we've been seeing played out on the political arena. So we look at the week's politics, but we look at it from a psychological perspective, and we've been doing it now for, well, this is our 57th episode. Right, John?
Right. So this first sequence I call Here Come the Corrupt Judges. Talking about Trump's malignant narcissism, one of the things that, of course, we know that the conservatives have sort of packed the courts with the federal courts as much as they could. And you and I have had some debate about to what extent are these, jurists who just happen to be conservative, or to what extent are they MAGA political operatives who are part of the insurrection itself, who are part of dismantling the rule of law and empowering Trump to be a dictator. And I think it's a mixed group, and we're going to talk about it. But there were just a series of rulings this week that I found so dispiriting. Because look, at this point, we've been saying we're almost relying on the courts to be the free safety and the people in the streets. So when you see the courts not doing their job, it's incredibly dispiriting. So let's just get into some of these examples of some of these cases. So, Harry, you remember when I love the irony that they had a military-style attack on the Institute of Peace when they tried to, he fired everybody, but he also sent some hoods over there to, break in and literally cart them all away. And then the director of the Institute of Peace changed the code so they couldn't get in. And so there was a standoff at the Institute for Peace, a blockade. And finally they were hauled away. Now, the director sued because he argued that this is not an executive branch institution. The Institute of Peace was formed by Congress to be an independent institution. Now, look, all things considered, I don't think the Institute for Peace is an incredibly important institution. I'm going to be honest, but it's an institution. And what he's doing here is something that he's replicating over and over again with institutions that are supposedly set up to be independent. Look, he's trying to do it with the Federal Reserve, right? He's trying to take over all functions and bring them according to his will. So it's the job of the judiciary to stop him. Well, yes. So right. So a local judge, I'm sorry, I forget who the judge was. Oftentimes I tell these stories, I realize I forget a lot of the facts, but a good judge said, no, you can't do that. You can't get rid of the Institute for Peace, people. Okay. And then what happened in the appeals court? Let's take a look. Appeals court upends order blocking Trump and Doge from their takeover of the Institute for Peace. And this is interesting. So I asked ChatGPT, what was the logic behind this decision? And so their logic was the district court's injunction prevents the president from exercising control over officers who wield substantial executive authority, and that constitutes irreparable harm. This line of reasoning is consistent with prior court rulings that say any unconstitutional restriction on the president's removal authority over executive officials constitute a separation of powers injury, and that kind of injury is considered irreparable. So let's just take this reasoning one by one. First of all, if you're telling me if Donald Trump couldn't control the Institute for Peace, that he would suffer irreparable harm. I really find that hard to believe. And secondly, it's not an executive branch. It's just not. and so he's arrogating authority to himself, right, that he doesn't have. And of course, the whole thing was ham-fisted and handled very, thuggishly and rudely and inappropriately. So what are they talking about? Oh, well, let's see who the 3-judge panel was that made this ridiculous decision. Oh, Gregory G. Costas, appointed by President Trump. Naomi Rao, appointed by President Trump. Justin Walker, appointed by President Trump. They concluded that because the Institute, quote, exercises substantial executive power. What substantial executive power do they wield? The president may remove its board members at will, and thus stayed the earlier district court order blocking Trump's firings. Substantial executive power. What power do they have? I mean, really, name me one thing that they have power over.
But what you're saying is right, though. He's arrogating all power over these institutes and these entities that are created by Congress, but they're not run by Congress, right? Mm-hmm. And the executive branch appoints people to these institutes that, I agree with you, shouldn't be allowed to be dismantled or destroyed by the president. They're set up by Congress. But it's that nebulous middle ground, right, mm-hmm. that is giving the courts this justification to say, well, actually, it's all the executive branch. It's not, but and this has always been respected, and that's what we see with Trump over and over again. There are just customary distinctions between entities, and he's wiping them all out.
Right. The other tradition we have in America is when a new president comes in, there's a lot of executive positions that they fill that, that means the people from the prior administration have to leave. But there are lifetime, positions of people who kind of run things, and he's literally just off with their heads for everyone who's the head of anything. We got to get rid of the Librarian of Congress. We've got to get rid of the head of the Kennedy Center. I mean, he's literally just firing everybody, anyone who has any institutional knowledge or competence or experience or authority. He's just decapitating, literally decapitating the government, because the head of everything is being removed.
But there's no explicit laws saying he can't. That's the problem. It's just always been respected, always, until now. I mean, look what he's doing with the Department of Justice. It's been independent since 1974, but there's no law about it.
Yeah.
And the Federal Reserve, he's trying to get the head of the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates. He's slamming him in public, and the guy is saying no, but we'll see how long that lasts.
So the second decision that was absolutely appalling was they had put a stay. So the lower court, I think it was Barrett Howell actually, put a stay on his deporting the people to these third countries. I think this is a group of people from Argentina that they're claiming are gang members, most of whom really aren't. And without due process, they want to send them to these death camps. Okay. And so that's a perfect example of something where, you got to put a stay on that, because there is I would say being killed is irreparable harm. Would you agree with me about that? So
it's hideous.
A temporary stay on anything, right? It would be something that cause a massive loss of life. Then that would be something you might want to put the pause button on, right, before you decide whether that's really appropriate. Well, apparently the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals didn't agree. Appeals court seems likely to back Trump's deportations under wartime law. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit heard arguments Monday on the president's use of the Alien Enemies Act in a case probably bound for the Supreme Court. A federal appellate panel appear poised Monday to back President Donald Trump's use of a centuries-old wartime law to fast-track deportations of Venezuelan migrants in a case widely expected to put that debate back before the Supreme Court. A three-judge panel of the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit grilled an attorney for targeting detainees during oral arguments, asking what authority judges had to, quote, second-guess the president's decision in defending the country amidst armed conflict. Trump declared the Tren de Aragua street gang a foreign terrorist organization in January and invoked the 1798 Alien Enemies Act in March 10th to send 137 people whom the government accused of being members of a notorious prison in El Salvador. The Trump administration has asserted that the gang is carrying out a, quote, invasion of the United States, quote, at the direction, end quote, of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's regime, a conclusion U.S. intelligence agencies have questioned.
And let's just say they've questioned it, and the people who questioned it have been fired.
Right, of course, that makes sense. Look, so one of the things, so there, you know, there's a sort of a plausible logic, and then you go a little bit deeper, like, yeah. And it probably, in some level, you could say, hey, it doesn't make sense for us to question the commander in chief about whether there's a national security threat. Some judge in Boston isn't the person who should decide whether we need to respond to a national security threat. But the larger context is somehow he's declaring all of these bogus states of emergency as a pretext for taking absolute power, taking extra constitutional measures, extra constitutional power because of a crisis that doesn't exist. It's like a Reichstag fire. And it's so transparent. And he's doing it with like 3 or 4 different states of emergency. We have tariffs because we have an economic state of emergency. And it's, you know, it's not just the law that matters. In the courts, facts and the law both matter. And the facts clearly show that this is all a lie, that this is all some 3-card Monte. There is no invasion. There is no war. It doesn't exist. It's simply not happening. There is no evidence for it. It's a lie that he's made up out of whole cloth. And so if a president says, we're being invaded by Martians, so I have to declare martial law, you can't say, well, it's the president who decides we're not being invaded by Martians. That's nuts.
But that's why this is headed to the Supreme Court, because some of the jurists, some of the judges have said the Alien Enemies Act is bogus for those very reasons, and sadly, we might see the Supreme Court hold up this kind of bogus justification. Yeah. That's what I'm really worried about. I do want to see them struggle over it because they probably will. And they have all kinds of ways of punting, you know, sending it back to a lower court, but not making an official ruling. So who knows what kind of courage they'll have. But look, keep going, man.
I believe the Supreme Court is also practicing what I've been calling fuckery, or if you know New York, if you know the streets of New York, 3-card Monte, where they move the cards around. And you have to look for the queen, because what's happening here is a lot of decisions aren't being made. You know, well, we're kicking it upstairs. Oh, we're going to send. Oh, but during all that time, he has free reign. Right. During all that time, he can do whatever he wants. So just by delaying it or having a narrow procedural ruling that doesn't really, all of these are sort of tricks, really, I think. I believe that these are manipulations, all to further the vast right-wing conspiracy.
Well, it's like holding off on presidential immunity so that there could be no court case during the campaign, when he was clearly guilty of serious things that were delayed, so that it ended up supporting him running for president. It wasn't overt, but it was very effective. I want to see what happens this time. We're gonna We have to keep hoping. I mean, I'm not hopeful, but we have to be making the arguments. So you had more to say about this latest ruling by the Supreme Court on that was supposedly about the birthright citizenship, but it really wasn't. It was about federal courts being able to do a nationwide injunction by making a ruling. Right.
Right. All right. Well, let's look at that. But before we look at the cover, I just want to say, I know you and I see this somewhat differently, so I think we're gonna have a good debate. You feel like Barrett had some good faith in doing this. I believe that it's bad faith. But again, when they put but they're by putting a stay on a decision, by stopping the stay. Okay, so someone said, a lower court judge said, okay, no, you cannot violate birthright citizenship. Okay, this has to, and of course that has to be appealed. They're saying no, but in the meantime, you can do whatever you want. Okay. In the meantime, you can do, just like in the Argentinian case. In the meantime, they can deport these people to El Salvador.
No. That's not true in this case. They can't do anything for 30 days. The government cannot deny birthright citizenship for 30 days. It's 30 days. But that gives people time to submit a class action suit, which will be permissible under this ruling, that would allow this to be looked at. So it's not allowing birthright citizenship to be denied until 30 days.
All right. Well, let's look at the case. Let's look at the news clip. After criticism from MAGA world, Amy Coney Barrett delivers for Trump. As President Donald Trump reveled in a major Supreme Court victory that curbed the ability of judges to block his policies nationwide, he had special praise for one of the justices, Amy Coney Barrett. Quote, "I just want to thank Justice Barrett, who wrote the opinion brilliantly," he said at the White House press conference soon after Friday's ruling. One of those outspoken critics, Trump allied lawyer Mike Davis, suggested that the pressure on Barrett had the desired effect. Quote, "Sometimes feeling the heat helps people see the light," he said in a text message. One notable wrinkle in the birthright citizenship case is that Barrett, as the most junior justice in the majority, would not have been expected to write it. Often Chief Justice Roberts, who gets to assign cases when he's in the majority, will write such rulings himself. Carolyn Shapiro, professor at Chicago College of Law, said the assignment suited Barrett, who is known for her expertise on legal procedure, but she also wondered, she's just speculating, if Roberts might have considered the impact of the complaints against Barrett and wanted to, quote, "give her a place to shine from the perspective of the right." So now this is speculation, but I think, Harry, it's really important to understand that when you're part of the vast right-wing conspiracy, when you're part of the gang, okay, then loyalty to the gang leader is everything. And when it looks like you're out of step, like these people who in the intelligence department who said, "No, actually, there is no invasion," then they turn their guns on you. Now, they can't fire Amy Coney Barrett. And traditionally, justices like Justice Kennedy, for example, may be appointed by a Republican, but then they become swing justices because they're independent jurists. And so they may be appointed by a conservative or a Republican, but then that Republican president may be disappointed in the rulings that they give. That's happened quite a lot through your and my lifetime, right? We've seen this happen in history over and over again because these were real jurists. They may have been Republicans, they may have been conservatives, but they believed in the rule of law, and so they called them like they saw them. But if you're part of this kind of group, okay, you can't survive if you're excluded, right? There's a feeling that if you're shunned by the group, you don't exist anymore. You don't have a community anymore. You're at risk. You could be harmed in all kinds of ways, and it does put enormous pressure on people. I'll just give you an example from a long time ago. Do you remember when Ken Starr said that Clinton was innocent of Whitewater? He cleared him. He'd actually been cleared by an earlier special prosecutor, but they managed to revive it and through a technicality appoint a second special prosecutor to have a whole new investigation. And once again, for the second time, they concluded that there was nothing there. He resigned. and became ensconced as the president of Pepperdine University. Started his job at Pepperdine, and the vast right-wing conspiracy said, "You son of a bitch! You were hired to get Clinton. You get your ass back in there and you go get him." And he did. He then quit Pepperdine or deferred, went back to being special counsel and said, "We got to find something on this guy." And then Linda Tripp walked into their office like a gift from God. And now we can get him with a sex scandal. And we'll come up with this perjury trap, where we'll ask him about Linda, about the, Monica, who he thinks nobody knows about. So of course he's going to say no, and then it'll be perjury. So I'm just saying that we're going to really see. We're really examining the soul of Amy Coney Barrett, right? Okay. We're really going to see if she is a jurist or ultimately if she is a cult member. And
I think that those news articles you put up there are speculation. I think Roberts has at times opposed Trump and opposed others. Roberts is not swayed by some right-wing conspiracy. He's a very respected jurist. I like his rulings some of the time. And there have been long articles about Barrett as actually a very kind of rigid constitutional scholar, very respected as a professor at Notre Dame, who has voted a number of times with the liberal wing when she thinks that they have a point. And I'm not yet willing to cede her as being manipulated, particularly when you have a lifelong appointment. I mean, what are they going to do to her?
Well, there's a lot of things they can do. I mean, they can dox you, they can shoot you. I mean, seriously.
Well, I don't look. I mean, I'm just not seeing evidence of this. This just seems like, when people used to watch the Politburo, on parade day to see who is standing next to, Brezhnev. It's, I just think it's speculation. And I wanted to make a case for the ruling that she had, but you had another. Did you have another piece you wanted to show first?
Yeah. So this is let's see this commentary from Jamel Bowie. We know exactly where the Supreme Court's change of heart has come from. It's about this ruling. Now he's quoting now the dissents from the Democratic judges. It's worth quoting at length from Jackson's dissent. The majority's ruling thus not only diverges from first principles, it is also profoundly dangerous, since it gives the executive the go-ahead to sometimes wield the kind of unchecked arbitrary power the founders crafted our Constitution to eradicate. Quote, "The founders of the United States of America," she continues, "squarely rejected a governing system in which the king ruled all and all others, including the courts, were his subordinates. In our Constitution-centered system, the people are the rulers, and we have the rule of law. The majority," Jackson argues, "has created a law-free zone of arbitrary power, which is unlikely to impact the public in a randomly distributed way. Those in the good graces of the executive," she writes, "have nothing to fear. Quote, "The new prerogative of the executive has to act unlawfully because no one can put a stay on him," right? No local judge can put even a temporary national stay on his acts. This is me talking on his acts, no matter how illegal they are. So that's the real thing that people have their hair on fire about this ruling, that is saying that you're right. It's not saying ruling out birthright citizenship. It's saying the judge who put a stay on his trying to get rid of birthright citizenship didn't have the right to put a stay because local judges can't put a national stay on the president. Those who accede to the executive's, now I'm back to the quote again. Those who accede to the executive's demands, too, will be in the clear. The wealthy and the well-connected will have little difficulty securing legal representation, going to court, and obtaining injunctive relief in their own name if the executive violates their rights. Consequently, the zone of lawlessness the majority has now authorized will disproportionately impact the poor, the uneducated, and the unpopular, i.e. those who may not have the wherewithal to lawyer up and will all too often find themselves beholden to the executive's whims. I know you're gonna argue with me about the
Look,
wisdom of this of the ruling, but its effect, as Judge Jackson is saying, is to create a law-free zone. If the president, for example, were to issue an executive order that all children under 2 should be killed and eaten on Fifth Avenue, okay, technically a judge in New York couldn't say, no, you can't kill the children. I'm going to stop you. He can keep killing children until it wends its way up the court.
Well, no, I hear you. Listen, I am not arguing. I'm not actually arguing for the other side. I'm just looking for some balance, and I'll explain to you what I mean. Okay, so we have a broken legislative branch right now. It's been broken for a long time. We haven't had real budgets passed. We have these continuing resolutions. We have, we have a corrupt Republican Party that wouldn't allow Obama to nominate someone to the Supreme Court because he was going to be stepping down in like 10 months. And yet it was okay to nominate, Amy Coney Barrett when Trump had 3 weeks. I mean, it's been corrupt. It hasn't been working. It's broken. The courts have also been strained. They're straining against the executive branch. So you started having judges using their ability to do nationwide stays on presidential behavior. And in fact, it's been plaguing presidents of both parties. When Biden wanted to fund student loans, it was a judge who put a national stay on that. It's been and as John knows, there's this judge shopping, and you go to Texas if you're a Republican, you go to Boston, and so this has been a problem for some time. And people expected the Supreme Court to address this for a number of years. And in this case, that's really what they did. They were not voting. They were not citing for changing the Constitution for birthright citizenship. They were saying that judges can no longer do this. So the Supreme Court was reorganizing the federal judiciary, right, with saying that judges couldn't do that. Now, in normal times, I think that would be a great idea. I would, because it adjusts things. I don't want things being stopped because someone goes to Texas or someone goes to Boston. But these are not normal times. We have someone who is arrogating power. We've never seen arrogated before by someone, and someone who John and I believe is mentally ill. And that's partly why he's doing it. He cannot be denied control over everything, or he gets, not only does he get disorganized and upset and pouty and whiny, but he also is vindictive, and he uses every bit of leverage to blackmail anybody into doing what? Look what's going on with this great big beautiful bill where he's blackmailing people in the Senate, and we're going to talk about it. So my point being, though, is that this was a good decision if this were normal times, but they're not normal times. It removes
a check on presidential power.
Agreed.
Right.
But
when they're stopping Biden from forgiving student loans, which is a completely, a benign, a gesture, not hurting anybody, to help, hundreds of thousands of young people pay their bills.
I don't disagree with you, but the principle is the same. Is presidential power going to be stopped by individual judges? And when is that okay? And if Trump were a normal president, I would be for like calming this down and letting the courts work in a more faithful way that what they're designed for. But that's not where we are. We're in a very different moment. That's why, John, I'm agreeing with you, but I don't agree with you that Coney Barrett was carrying water for the right when she wrote this opinion. I don't.
Well, I hope you're right. There is an argument for that. There is a fair argument.
People have said it's a very well written decision. I read it. I'm not a lawyer, but I mean it doesn't sound stupid to me. But let me read you. I'm going to make a case again, not making a case for this being the right ruling, but I want to make
Right.
a case for what the thinking was. So this is from a law professor named Bray, who teaches actually at Notre Dame, where Barrett taught. And this is his argument from an op-ed in the New York Times. On Friday, the Supreme Court decided the birthright citizenship cases, except they aren't really about birthright citizenship. In an executive order issued in January, President Trump wanted to redefine citizenship in the United States. The court's decision in Trump v. Casa does not address that effort. It is rather about the scope of remedies given by the federal courts. In the decision, a 6-3 majority of the court held that the federal courts have no authority to issue universal injunctions, which are court orders that control how the government acts towards everyone in the country, not just the parties in the case. The High Court's decision has the potential to reshape the relationship between the federal judiciary and the executive branch, and the court got it right, according to this professor. What is not going to change because of this decision is birthright citizenship. The court stated that the executive order would not go into effect for 30 days, which gives plenty of time for the challengers to switch from universal injunctions to other avenues like class actions. I expect the courts to continue to reject, in case after case, the government's arguments for the birthright citizenship order. The likely result is that President Trump's unconstitutional executive order on birthright citizenship will never go into effect. But something else is at stake: competing visions for the role of the courts in our constitutional system. One vision is to say that the job of every judge is to declare the law and make sure everyone, including the president, follows it all the time. There's a lot to be said for following the law, and in our constitutional system, no one is above it. Another vision is to say that the chief job of the courts is to decide cases. Resolving disputes is what gives the courts their legitimacy. It is the core of the judicial power given by the Constitution, and robust judicial power is tolerable in a democracy precisely because the judges stay in their lane. A judge's job is not to say, quote, someone is wrong on the internet, unquote, and then do something about it. Instead, her job is to decide the case before her fearlessly, according to the existing law, and to give the proper remedy to whichever party wins. These two visions were on offer in the opinions in Trump v. Casa, with Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson offering the first vision in dissent and Justice Barrett offering the second vision for the majority. We live in a time of great pressure on our constitutional system, with a president who thinks he can make laws, he can't, suspend laws, he can't, and punish enemies without a trial, he can't. It is precisely at this time that the first vision is most attractive and the second vision is most essential. The courts must defend constitutional rights and liberties, but they must defend them as courts defend them, deciding cases for the parties and giving remedies to the parties. That function is what gives courts their constitutional legitimacy in a democratic society. It will mean that the courts don't have the power to remedy every wrong, and it will mean that a patchwork of rulings sometimes persists. But to remedy every wrong immediately and everywhere outside of the case and the parties is not what the courts are designed for. Now, that's the strongest argument. And this is the argument that Barrett made. I don't agree with it. I think in these times, we need federal judges stopping a president who is dangerously close to taking over reins of power across the nation.
Right.
But I do respect the reasoning of it, if these were normal times.
You know, Harry, I think the underlying problem is, and I'll give an example. Republicans use every institution in a purely corrupt way. So what happens then is the institution becomes corrupt. And the example I'll give is the filibuster. Okay. And then the Republicans decided they were going to filibuster 100% of Barack Obama's judicial nominees, that he would get to appoint 0 judges. They would just literally filibuster every single one. Well, at that point, the Democrats said, okay, the system is broken. I mean, we can't function as a society this way. You know, we used to have a more comedy between the not comedy, comedy. We used to have more consideration, and we used to work as colleagues across the aisle. We tussled, but we sort of got there, and we respected certain traditions, and we respected the right of the president to function as a president, right? And one of his functions is to appoint judges. So then they got rid of the filibuster. So an institution fell. The filibuster is actually a very useful institution. The filibuster is what stops the tyranny of the majority. Yes. And the whole point is that the Senate, that analogy, I don't know who used this first, if it was Benjamin Franklin or whatever, said the House of Representatives is like the teacup and it boils over, with passion, because the Senate are more like the philosopher kings, they're the more sedate, wise ones. That's why they're there for longer, for 6 years. And they're meant to be the saucer, that the tea that spills out of the cup, that they catch and let it cool off.
And they weren't elected in the first system of our government.
That's a good point, actually. Yeah. So they really were sort of like philosopher kings that were sort of appointed, wise men, whatever, or probably just people who were connected. But we're idealizing it. We're putting
slave owners, a lot of slaves.
Yeah. So let's not idealize it too much, but it was an effective check and balance, and that whole system is based on checks and balances. Yeah. But the Republicans abused it to the point where we said, okay, we can't have that filibuster anymore. We're just going to have to get rid of it because you're basically making it impossible for us to function as a government. Well, then they win the election, and we've abolished the filibuster for judges, and so they can ram through Elmer Fudd if they want to, and they did. The most disgusting, corrupt, unqualified, people that conceivable, right? And nobody could stop them. Even if they only won by 1 vote, right? So if they had the majority, they had total power. So
this was Mitch McConnell's great ambition. He worked at it for decades.
He did. And that's one of the reasons they've been effective, is they've been working on this vast right-wing conspiracy for decades. And we haven't been fighting back for decades with the assiduous attention and force that we need to. So I think this is another example where, look, the idea that a judge could put a hold on something lawless that the president is doing, right, in and of itself is not necessarily such a bad idea, but they abused it so badly that Biden couldn't do anything. They always went to the same judge in Texas, Hangin' Pete or whatever, I don't remember what his name is, and they would always like it. Well, why did they have to bring the case about financial aid? I mean, paying off the loans in Texas. Somehow they made this argument that it affected Texas in a particularly bad way. And that was why he had to be the judge to look at it. It was ridiculous. So now we're going to take that power away because they abused it. But now we have lost another check and balance.
But we were using it, those of us on the other side, to stop Trump's Muslim ban. Like it was the same thing. It's been horrible. And again, you're right. Democrats so reluctant to use the weapons they have. I mean, the Democrats should have gotten rid of the filibuster altogether at the beginning of Biden's term. And they didn't. Mm-hmm. It has to be done at the beginning of the term. The Senate sets the rules every time. Filibuster is not in the Constitution, by the way. It's a custom. Mm-hmm. It came much later. So, and the argument is, but if we take down the filibuster, then they will. But they've used it to block everything. They filibuster every bill. Has to be 60 votes.
So basically, we're screwed either way, is my point. If we have a filibuster, they won't let a Democratic president govern. And if we don't have a filibuster, they're going to ram through. We're going to have an invasion, all right. It's not from Argentina. It's from the right wing. They're just going to pack the courts with the kind of people that are making the kinds of decisions that we're railing about.
I agreed. I do think there are some, there are Trump appointees who have done the right thing and who are really thoughtful jurists. Not everyone that Mitch McConnell ran through was Elmer Fudd. But but it's a stacked court. It's a stacked system. They've been undermining the rule of the Senate and the legislature and the courts,
right,
for about 2 decades. I mean, they never got over Bill Clinton being elected. They never got over it.
Or Barack Obama. Yeah, and so I think that's the point, is that what I found discouraging about this ruling is Congress has literally castrated itself. They've abdicated all authority. And now it feels like the judges are also helping to block for President Trump in some ways to limit the ability of the courts to be a check on him. I don't think it's accidental. If Biden were president, I don't think we'd be getting these same rulings from these same judges.
Look, we've had a terrible week where Trump has been winning internationally. He's been winning in the courts. He's winning in Congress. It's just it's demoralizing. And yes, we're watching the courts. I think in this case, again, this particular ruling, I think is not a dishonest one. It may be wrong, but I don't think it's a dishonest one. But you may be right that it is. We'll see. I mean, we'll see what happens. I'm hoping not.
I'm just curious if Biden had appealed to the Supreme Court that ruling that blocked his giving relief for financial aid. I mean, for tuition borrowing. I just wonder if they would have come up with the same sweeping denial of that Texas judge's right to have second guess President Biden.
No, I hear you. I mean, people on the right and left have been complaining about this for a long time. I mean, it's not a new issue. But yeah, didn't seem to come up then, did it?
Yeah, right. So again, everything they always play both sides, whichever side is more advantageous to them. All right, so that was a big bummer, but I think you are pointing out that there's hope, Harry. I think it's important, actually. If Amy Coney Barrett really is just a member of the Trump criminal gang, we're fucked, right? If she has a shred of conscience, if she still is a jurist, if she actually cares about the rule of law, but we just didn't like this particular, then we have a chance. So I'm hoping you're right. I'm hoping you'll be able to say, I told you so.
Well, I just reading about her and reading this stuff, it's my intuition. Maybe it's a clinical intuition. There's something about, having 7 children, several of whom you adopted, who are mixed race. I mean, that's not typical of the MAGA right. I think she's a kind of rigid iconoclast, really. She's like an original who's like this. That's at least my read on her. We'll see. She may end up bending in the wind. I hope not.
So the next thing we have to talk about is this budget, right? What I call the immoral budget. It's so. I mean, look, we're so people say, look, you're from a psychological point of view. You don't have to review the news. We all know about the budget, but still, it really is going to affect people's well-being. It's going to affect their psychology. But it's so obscene on 3 levels. First, of course, they're giving more tax relief to the rich, but they're raising taxes on the poor. So it's Robin Hood in reverse. They're robbing from the poor to give to the rich. I can't think of anything that really is more immoral than that, except that on top of that, they're also ballooning the deficit. The deficit is almost doubled under Trump, and so what they're doing is hurting the economy and also hurting our children and our grandchildren, because they're going to be staggering under debt. I mean, there was an op-ed in the Times today from 2 of the people on Clinton's economic team, and they're bragging, hey, we balanced the budget, which they did. And they said, And they said then the fear was that, my God, if we don't balance the budget, we already have 65% of GDP, or 65% of our the budget of the government is in debt. Now we're going to be topping 100%. So at that point, it means people are we're going to have to raise the interest rate on our bonds. More of our money that we pay in taxes is going to have to go to debt service rather than to helping people. So somehow they've managed to, it's always been this debate. Well, do you cut services so you can balance the budget? That's a kind of fiscal. No, they're cutting services and they're ballooning the deficit.
Right. No. There's a really distressing article in the Times saying that the dollar is in the worst shape it's been in since 1973, the time of the oil embargo. I mean, it's terrible what's happening. And they're really doing it. And the Republicans in Congress know it, and they're voting for it anyway. I just want to take this one moment to talk about Trump's psychology. I don't know how many of you out there have ever experienced a real sociopath. Mm-hmm. It's also the term psychopath. They're really interchangeable. But a sociopath is somebody who has no empathy for others, takes pleasure in humiliating, robbing, extorting, blackmailing others, and feels no compunction. That is, no guilt, no remorse. It's an extreme form of personality disorder, and Trump has features of it along with his malignant narcissism. That means that if you've ever known a real bully in high school, that was a sociopath. That's somebody who would threaten to beat you up if you didn't give them your lunch money. These are people who enjoy humiliating you and will chase you down and beat the crap out of you. They're very hard to fight because they never want to back down. Yeah. And no, I'm glad right. And what we're seeing in Congress right now is Trump threatening anyone who opposes him on this bill. Right. Even though it's a terrible bill, it's destructive in all kinds of ways, but not in the short term. In the short term, it's fine.
Well, except for the people on Medicaid. I want to get back to what you're saying about the malignant narcissist. Right. For a malignant narcissist, because they're sadists, okay, it's not enough to win. You also have to harm as many people as possible.
And humiliate them.
And also because he is such a, we've talked about how he revels in tricking and screwing people who trust him. That's how perverse and evil he really is. So think about this. They're going to throw something like 17 million people off of Medicaid, which he promised he would never do, which is really causing irreparable harm to these people. But it's disproportionately going to affect rural Republican voters. They're estimating that hundreds of rural hospitals are going to close. They're just going to close because most of their money comes from Medicaid. That's their whole revenue stream. So if you kick all the people off of Medicaid, they have no paying customers and they're going to go under. So it reminds me actually of what Trump used to do with his buildings, right? It wasn't enough that he's making millions and millions just by giving his name, to brand some building. He also has to screw the workmen and not pay them. He also has so it's always not enough. Always, right? And he does it repeatedly. The people who did hang the curtains, the people that did the carpet, all those people go unpaid. So it's not enough that he makes a fortune. He also has to screw innocent people.
Right. What he would do is pay half the bill and say, you're famous for working for me. That's worth at least half of your bill. And then people would sue him and he would just fight them in court because they couldn't last as long as he would. I mean, this is a kind of ruthlessness. And it's so hard. I'm going to give you one other example. When I was at the University of Michigan, I was a graduate student in psychology. There was a scandal. An advanced medical student, a chief resident, was arrested for selling prescription drugs. And when the cops came to his house and knocked on the door and said, "Are you so-and-so?" He said no, and he walked past them and walked out of the house. Turns out he was engaged to 3 different women who didn't know about each other. This was a severe sociopath who got caught.
Yeah.
No remorse, no caring, and they're so dangerous because they'll do anything to you.
Right.
You can't reason with them. You can't ask them for mercy.
Yeah.
And
Right.
Trump is getting stuff through Congress by doing this to the senators and congressmen, and he's doing it to the people in the country who will be affected by the bill.
Right. Well, we have some people commenting on the bill. First, we had Josh Shapiro, governor of Pennsylvania.
I have made very clear Pennsylvania can't backfill those cuts on Medicaid or on SNAP. And there's real question as to whether or not we'd even be able to operate SNAP any longer, given the change in the formula and given the people that are going to be knocked off. Beyond Medicaid and SNAP, we have about 25 rural hospitals in Pennsylvania that are operating at a deficit, where more than 50% of their revenue each year is coming from Medicaid. By slashing Medicaid, you're actually putting those 25 rural hospitals at risk. Beyond healthcare and food assistance, 26,000 people in Pennsylvania will likely lose their jobs. These are people who work in the energy sector. And because of the devastating cuts to energy, you're putting a whole lot of people out of work and making it harder for us in Pennsylvania, a net energy exporter, to do the work we need to do to generate more energy, particularly more clean energy. I don't know why they're rushing this through and at the same time making all of those cuts, ballooning our federal deficit by $3.3 trillion, with a T, trillion dollars. It kind of doesn't make sense to me. You know, President Trump ran on a platform of cutting the deficit, said he'd never knock anybody off of Medicaid, and he wanted more energy jobs in the United States. He's doing the exact opposite and screwing over, by the way, some of the very people that voted for him. Those rural hospitals are largely in communities that supported the president. Those lifelines in those communities are going to be taken away. A ton of people in rural communities that voted for the president access Medicaid and SNAP benefits. The president loved to hug the building trades during his campaign, and now he's pushing them aside with these cuts to energy projects. I hope cooler heads will prevail. I hope the Senate of the United States will not pass a bill that will be devastating to Pennsylvania and other states. I hope that the House and Senate will realize ramming this through is harmful, and by the way, very unpopular, and instead try and work in a bipartisan manner to give tax relief to people who need it and protect people's access to health care and food assistance.
And so he lays out the case very clearly.
So eloquent.
Yeah.
He's so
and
great.
by the way, it's a swing state. Pennsylvania's a swing state. So all of these rural voters in Pennsylvania who put Trump in the White House, they're going to lose their insurance, lose their jobs, lose their hospitals. And it's unpopular. So hopefully that will make a difference in 2026. Harry, you wanted to show Tom Tillis. And I think part of what, go ahead.
Yeah. Tom Tillis, who's a very, very conservative senator from North Carolina, I believe, was really making noise about the lying about Medicaid. I mean, he was explicit about it, and Trump went after him. Said, "We're gonna set up a primary opponent to Tillis," which is again threatening an ally.
Right.
Here's a Republican in the Senate,
exactly.
And Tillis, in this sort of odd move, said, okay, I'm not running again, and now is opposing Medicaid. I don't know why he didn't just announce that later. I'm not sure why he had to look like he was caving into this pressure. But Trump is like a guy at school with a baseball bat who isn't afraid to hit you over the head with it. And that's what he did to Tillis. And Tillis, who's been, really really admirable in the way that he argues. I have a long clip, but I really like how he lays out the case. So I thought you guys might want to see it.
The Medicaid proposal in this bill bears no resemblance to that kind of discipline and due diligence. It has no insights into how these provider tax cuts are going to be absorbed without harming people on Medicare. And even worse, most of my colleagues do not even understand on either side of the aisle the interplay of state-directed payments and the devastating consequences of the funding flows that are going to be before us. Mr. President, here's how I figured out the impact in North Carolina. I used to be Speaker of the House, and I like the Speaker and have good relationship with the Speaker and the President Pro Tem, so I called them up. And I had my staff ask them if they would do an economic impact assessment on what this proposed bill would do to the Medicaid program in North Carolina. But I didn't want just the view of the Republican partisan staff that reports to the Speaker and the President Pro Tem on how they're going to absorb this bill. I decided to go to Josh Stein, the governor, and I went to his Democrat staff for Medicaid. I asked them to prepare an estimate, independent of the estimate that I had done with fiscal research. But I took a step further, Mr. President. I went to the Hospital Association. I asked 3 different independent groups, a partisan Democrat group, a partisan Republican group of experts, and a nonpartisan group of the Hospital Association to develop an impact assessment independent, not talking, not sharing, reporting to me. And what I found is the best case scenario is about a $26 billion cut. Now, we've got a delay, so it may be 2 years, it may be 1 year. All it does is make that $26 billion happen in year 1 or year 12, but the impact is the same, Mr. President, and it's indisputable. Now, when I actually presented this report that you can find on my website, I had people in the administration say, "You're all wet, you don't know what you're doing." I said, well, why don't we assemble a series of meetings? We're going to provide you our analytics. You go through it, tear it apart. I told about Mehmet Oz, who I consider to be one of the most capable people in the Trump administration. He's a brilliant man, and I'd encourage my Democrat colleagues to talk to him. He knows his stuff, and he's very focused on getting efficiencies out of CMS. So we had 3 different conference calls with CMS, with Oz on the phone and on the video, and me on the video. And I said this, guys, I would love nothing more than you to prove me wrong. I would love nothing more for you to tell me it's not $26 billion or $30 billion, that it's $2.6 billion or $2 billion or $200 million. But after 3 different attempts for them to discredit our estimates, the day before yesterday, they admitted that we were right. That between the state-directed payments and the cuts scheduled in this bill, there's a reduction of state-directed payments. And then there's the reduction of the provider tax. They can't find a hole in my estimate. So what they told me is that, yeah, it's rough, but North Carolina's used the system. They're going to have to make it work. All right. So what do I tell 663,000 people in 2 years or 3 years when President Trump breaks his promise by pushing them off of Medicaid because the funding's not there anymore, guys?
Wow.
Wow.
That was brave and that was clear. And that's why he has to be beheaded. Right?
Exactly. Oh, sure. No, it's incredible. And he's, talk about a tough-minded person.
Mm-hmm.
Like, here's all the data, talk to me. And he's stepping down.
And this is what happens with authoritarian regimes, right?
Exactly.
I mean, you can be sure that Tom Tillis has, backed Trump up, 99% of the time, right? Oh, yeah. But the way Trump works is if you, and any authoritarian leaders, if you defy him or disagree with him on anything, it's the death penalty. And so basically Trump said, I'm going to call the death penalty. I'm going to get you out of office. And I think in some ways the timing of Tillis's resignation is saying basically, F you, I'm quitting. So you can't fire me. I quit. And I'm going to be, and at least while I'm here, I'm going to speak the truth on behalf of my constituents. But unfortunately, we're watching them basically squeeze out anyone with any vestige of conscience or humanity or decency, right? If you're not a stone cold killer or an insane true believer, you're out. And so talking about what a liar Trump is, I guess we're always talking about what a liar Trump is. Tillis said very profoundly, he said, look, you promised during the campaign that you would not cut Medicaid. He's holding him responsible to that promise. CNN put together a supercut reel of all the times Trump promised he wouldn't cut Medicaid.
Medicaid, we're not going to do anything with that.
Medicare, Medicaid, none of that stuff is going to be touched. We're not cutting Medicaid. We're not changing Medicaid. Here's what I want on Medicaid. We're not touching anything. Just as I promised, there will be no cuts. There won't be read my lips anymore. We're not going to touch it.
No, I don't want to read your lips. I want to read your actions. And you know what? After he knocks millions of people off of Medicaid, he'll probably claim he didn't cut Medicaid, even when it's happening right in front of us, right?
Sure. Why not? Why admit to anything, John? Why? You can just say it's not true. And
fortunately for him, he's picked a psychopathic person to run his communications. Here's what Karen Levitt has to say about Medicaid.
So this bill strengthens Medicaid. It will protect those benefits that hardworking Americans need, and that's why the president wants this bill to pass. The senator was wrong. The president put out a Truth Social post addressing it, and then the senator announced he's no longer running for office anymore. So I think that case has been closed, and the White House is continuing to focus on getting this legislation to the president's desk for his signature.
You're not strengthening Medicaid. It's just you're doing the opposite. And she's referring to Tillis. Well, and he's not running anymore, so I guess that's case closed.
I mean, it's obviously he's wrong. No, Mike Johnson, remember, little Mikey Johnson said that this was strengthening Medicaid and also said that it wasn't going to add to the debt. I mean, it's just all double talk.
Yeah.
I really hope that Mike Johnson has a terrible time over the next week, next few days, trying to get this thing passed. But Trump will win because he'll just threaten all the holdouts.
Right.
That's what he'll do.
Right. Elizabeth Warren actually put out a tweet where she went state by state to say how many people are going to lose their Medicaid. Now, I'm not going to read all 50 states because that would take too long. For those of you who are just listening, though, I'll just start in the A's. Alabama, 219,000. Alaska, 39,000. Arizona, 365,000. Arkansas, 158,000. California, 2.3 million. Colorado, 240,000. Connecticut, 86,500. Well, you get the idea. 17 million people altogether. And somehow they can hide this. 17 million people are going to lose insurance, and they're going to say that didn't happen.
Well, yeah, the Democrats are just drooling over this bill because they think it's going to assure them taking back Congress. We'll see.
I don't know if that's true. We'll see. But I'm going to show a clip now about how unpopular the bill is.
Yeah.
They don't think of it as one big, beautiful bill. They think of it as one big, bad bill. What are we talking about here? Well, let's take a look at the big, beautiful bill, net favorable ratings. I got 5 different polls for you on the screen. And you don't have to be a mathematical genius to know that these are horrible, horrible, horrible numbers. Washington Post, minus 19 points. Pew Research Center, minus 20 points. Fox News, minus 21 points. Quinnipiac University, minus 26 points. And then KFF takes the cake at minus 29 points on the net favorable rating. Holy Toledo, you just never see numbers this poor. I have been trying to look through the history books to find if there was another piece of legislation that was on the verge of passing that was as unpopular as this one. And Boris Sanchez, I cannot find one.
Yikes, that says a lot. Harry, often as folks learn more about what these bills contain, and let's be frank, lawmakers actually sell what they contain, we see them become more popular. Has that been the case here?
I'll give you a one-word answer. No. No, it hasn't become more popular. What are we talking about here? Well, Quinnipiac University, we mentioned that, right? Well, Quinnipiac University, the big, beautiful bill, the net favorable rating on it, we mentioned minus 26 points now. They pulled it back in early June. It was the same, minus 26 points. Simply put, the bill was unpopular in early June, and it is just as unpopular now. To quote Sir Charles Barkley, terrible, terrible, terrible. We're talking about a minus 45 net favorable rating among independents, the center of the electorate. You just can't win in politics when you have a minus 45 net favorable rating among independents. Now, the key question is, Boris, why is this bill so unpopular? And I think we can see it pretty well here, which is Donald Trump was reelected back in November because the American people thought that his policies and his agenda during the first term helped their family, or more likely to help than hurt their family. It is the exact opposite when it comes to the big, beautiful bill. All right, Trump's policies in your family. The big, beautiful bill, get this, just 23% of Americans say that the policies or the big, beautiful bill helps their family, compared to 49% who say that they hurt their family. Very different than Trump's first term agenda, where you saw the help at 44%, outranking the hurt at 31%. The bottom line is, Boris Sanchez, when you get more than double the percentage of Americans who say a bill hurts their family than helps them, no wonder it is one of the most unpopular pieces of legislation that I have ever seen.
Too strong.
My namesake, Harry Denton. So glad he was named for me.
So it's really interesting. We've talked about how he likes to be popular, but that is at kind of at odds with his psychological compulsion to harm people. And it's interesting they use the word hurt. That 2 to 1, people think this is going to hurt Americans.
Yes. Well, I do think Trump cares a great deal about his ratings. I mean, hugely. But he's also able to deny anything to himself, too. So
Right.
He can be utterly destructive in this bill and think, it's a beautiful bill. I'm doing a good thing.
Right. And, we'll see how they, it's interesting, actually, the Fox poll was also in the same numbers, but we'll see how they play it on Fox, because that's what becomes a reality for most people. So it's very sad, this bill. So we're looking for the resistors of the week.
Yes.
Harry, I picked ourselves.
Well, I think mostly you, John, but go ahead, explain.
Well, we've been, one of the missions of the show from the beginning has been to inform the public about Trump's probable dementia. And if we were right, we said it was going to get worse and worse and harder to deny. So I was on a radio show, Dean Obadiah's show, and what was amazing is I'm going to play the 2 minutes of that interview. But then what is exciting is some news outlets did pick it up. So let's just see that.
I don't know if you noticed this, Doctor. There's a few times, and I saw him recently in Canada at the G7. His body posture is different than it was the first term. And things, he's like slunched. He's really hunched over, like a penguin-esque almost. I mean, to conjure up a vision of how I see it. And he didn't walk with he used to walk with an energy like he was bigger than life because he was Donald Trump, right? I don't see that now. I see something else, and I'm not sure if there's anything there from a psychological point of view that you can attribute that to.
Well, yes, because when we talk about deterioration from dementia, I was focusing on language because that's the thing we most observe. But we always see deterioration in motor performance. And that's one of the other things we pointed out before the election. Again, if you look at film, and there isn't that much of it, but we found some of him doing athletic activities in the 80s. I have a film of him playing volleyball. I mean, diving, to dig the ball and popping up and hitting a high shot. He was very coordinated. And now, he really does have trouble getting up the stairs. He does trip and fall. It's not just I hate to do a gotcha thing. Oh, he tripped on the stairs. But no, his gait is slow. He is falling.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's actually even more diagnostic, and I had a neurologist point this out, and then several neurologists confirmed it. If you watch the way he walks, he has what they call a leg swing, where his right leg, he kind of swings it in a semicircle, like it's a dead weight, and he's just kind of swinging it around. It's very apparent in some tape and not so much in others, but that right leg swing is considered to be very diagnostic of a specific type of dementia, frontotemporal dementia. So I've had dementia experts tell me that she's absolutely convinced, Dr. Zoffman told me she's absolutely convinced that it's frontotemporal dementia that he has because of that telltale right leg swing. By the way, I'm sorry, I mispronounced it. It's Dean Obeidallah.
Obeidallah. Yeah.
And I've been on his show before. And what I wanted to point out is that little radio interview produced some news articles. So I just want to show you some of the headlines that were directly, and by the way, Harry, they quote not just me, they quote you, and they cite the show, but I'm not going to read from the articles right now. I'm just going to show you, because I just show you it had an impact. That's all we're trying to show.
Of course.
The LA Progressive had an article, Sane Washing the Donald. Since his return, newsrooms have downplayed Trump's decline, helping normalize a presidency defined by incoherence, paranoia, and cruelty. NewJersey.com. Psychologist makes grim prediction about Trump's mental capacity. Penn Live. Donald Trump hit with disturbing cognitive claims, a weekend at Bernie's White House. And also it got some international attention. This is from the Irish Star. 4 urgent signs Donald Trump has a specific type of dementia, experts warn. An expert sounded off on the 4 signs that U.S. President Donald Trump may be suffering from early stages of dementia. The Daily Express. Donald Trump exhibiting 4 signs of dementia as expert makes health warning. The Daily Mirror. Another British tabloid. Donald Trump's dementia fears spike with expert outlining 4 signs of the condition in the president. So, it's just a smattering, but I think what's going to happen is because he's going to continue to deteriorate, right? It's going to become more and more absurd that the mainstream press is not covering it. It's going to be like the Emperor's New Clothes.
I hope so. I remember during the campaign when John and I began this show more than a year ago. John, you were interviewed, and it just got copied and picked up. Same thing happened for me. I had something at Cornell, like a 1-page briefing, and it ended up having like 1 million views, and then it all disappeared when he was elected.
Right.
And what's so great, and I'm so glad you showed everybody, and also it's very cool to see you on these other shows, but then we're starting to see a run of these stories again. Right. This was what it was like in April before the election in 2024. This is what started to happen when you and I and other clinicians began sounding off, and it disappeared. So let's hope it's starting up again.
And dementia update. So each week I try to show his dementia being evidenced yet one more time, and it's getting worse. Listen to Trump at a news conference. He's asked a question not once but twice. How long are migrants going to be kept in the alligator gulag that they're building out there in Florida? Okay, so they asked not once but twice. Hear how Trump answers that question.
Dana Marie McNichol, Fox News Channel. Mr. President, is there an expected time frame that detainees will spend here, days, weeks, months? And does that have anything to do with the immigration judges you just spoke about being trained and staffed here?
When you say, what was the first part of your question?
Is there a specific time frame you expect the detainees to spend here? Days, weeks, months?
In Florida?
Yes, here at Alligator Alcatraz.
I'm going to spend a lot. Look, this is my home state. I love it. I love your government. I love all the people around. These are all friends of mine. They know them very well. I mean, I'm not surprised that they do so well. They're great people. Ron has been a friend of mine for a long time. I feel very comfortable in the state. I'll spend a lot of time here. I want to, for 4 years, I've got to be in Washington, and I'm okay with it because I love the White House. I even fix up the little Oval Office. I make it, it's like a diamond. It's beautiful. It's so beautiful. It wasn't maintained properly, I will tell you that. But even when it wasn't, it was still the Oval Office, so it meant a lot. But I'll spend as much time as I can here. You know, my vacation is generally here because it's convenient. I live in Palm Beach. It's my home. And I have a very nice little place, nice little cottage to stay at, right? But we have a lot of fun, and I'm a big contributor to Florida. You know, pay a lot of tax, and a lot of people move from New York, and I don't know what New York is going to do. A lot of people moved to Florida from New York, and it was for a lot of reasons, but one of them was taxes. The taxes are so high in New York, they're leaving. I don't know what New York's going to do about that, because some of the biggest, wealthiest people and some of the people that pay the most taxes of any people anywhere in the world, for that matter, they're moving to Florida and other places. So we're going to have to help some of these states out, I think. But thank you very much. I'll be here as much as I can. Very nice question. With that, I'd like to just end by saying I want to.
Oh my God.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Right?
He just went on a tear. It had nothing to do with the question.
Nothing.
Didn't understand it. And then went on about everything.
After having watched that a few times, I think he starts talking about how much time he's going to spend in Florida. That's the only connecting idea, right?
Yes.
But twice they asked him, how long are these migrants that you're putting in this concentration camp? How long are they going to be in the concentration camp? And he goes, oh, I have a nice place in Florida. I like to spend as much time here as I can. I love your governor. We're not asking how long you're going to be in Florida. This is our president.
And this is the kind of decline that John and I have been documenting and talking about, right? Because it's not psychotic. He's not coming out and saying, the clouds have machine guns and they're shooting at my head. I mean, it's not crazy.
Right.
It's tangential. He's answering things in a he's kind of flipping around nearby, kind of adjacent. Answering the question and also congratulating himself. And I made the Oval Office really kind of like a jewel because it was everyone before me had neglected it because I'm really great. And I have a little place, Mar-a-Lago, a little cottage. And he just goes off into an example to congratulate himself for 5 minutes. It's awful, isn't it? Terrible to watch.
And actually, that did spark some more press. So I'd shown a quote from Penn Live that responded to the Dean Abdallah interview. They wrote a follow-up article 2 days later in response to this press conference. Donald Trump accused of, quote, crazy cognitive decline after fumbling alligator Alcatraz press conference. This comes as Trump has had a series of gaffes and stumbles that have led folks to make claims about his own cognitive health. Acclaimed psychologist and former Johns Hopkins professor, Dr. John Gartner, I bet you didn't know I was acclaimed, made some of the most disturbing claims during a recent appearance on the Dean Abdallah show. Gartner claims that Trump is suffering from dementia and will, quote, fall off a cognitive cliff cognitively before the end of his term. Here's the thing. He will become impaired enough that they need to invoke the 25th Amendment. Yes, Gartner said. Will they invoke the 25th Amendment? No.
John, I think you are acclaimed.
Harry, have you ever seen anyone acclaim me?
No. I listen. It's great that they're quoting you, and I'm glad they noticed that terrible press conference. I didn't get a chance to watch it. I guess I'm gonna have to go back and look at it. And we should do at some point a deep dive of him before an audience for like 15 minutes and see if we can spot some patterns of how he gets disorganized. You pointed out something I think so smart, which is he went from how long will inmates stay there to how long will you be here in Florida? And he just took that piece of it and went with it.
Right. No, you can see it so clear. You can see the cognitively disturbed thinking in plain sight. It's all there to be seen.
As you once said a long time ago, this Donald Trump is the best Donald Trump you'll ever see, because it's downhill from here.
And, I was on Dean's show a couple of times earlier before the election, and it also generated some headlines, actually more when the press was slightly willing to report on it. And one of the things he said is, well, how is this going to work? I mean, how can we have a president with dementia? I mean, if he's going to get worse and worse, this is terrifying. What's that going to look like? Well, we're going to get a chance to find out.
Well, John, what time is it?
I think it's time for shrink wrap, Harry. What did we learn today?
We learned, well, I think we're learning the extent of Trump's power. We're really seeing it. We're seeing it internationally, where Canada caved on putting a tax on materials for cars. We saw the Supreme Court certainly give a ruling that made things easier for him. We saw him put a really hideous bill through the House and now the Senate on the timetable that he demanded. We watched him intimidate a really powerful senator to the point where that senator has resigned. We're seeing destruction. He's building Alcatraz, right? He's building concentration camps. And by the way, in the big, beautiful bill, there's a lot of money to build these kinds of prisons. So it's all in there. His whole agenda is in that bill. I'm really demoralized. This has been the hardest week that I've spent watching this administration, because I don't see anywhere where he didn't win. Now, I still have faith in parts of the judiciary. I have some faith in the upcoming elections and in the people, in the population. But I have not felt this awful in a long time. And as I said last week, my friends, my family, my romantic partner, I'm going to be spending more time with them this week, because I really need that closeness to get through it. What do you think?
Harry, our audience is going to be very upset to hear how discouraged you are, because I'm always the hair on fire, doom and gloom guy, and you're always the reassuring presence. So if you're throwing in the towel, I can already see the people on the live stream freaking out, and we'll probably get like 2,000 views, because whenever we're really depressing, we get less views.
No. Why is Harry so down?
That's right, Harry. We're counting on you to keep our mood up. You can't fall. But look, and look, I think the thing that I found so, and also they're going to hate you're saying he's winning, right? That he's winning in all these. I mean, we were actually told that this week. Yeah, this week. Now you could point out, and see, you're forcing me to take your role, how unpopular the bill is.
Terrible.
So it's not like people aren't paying attention. So maybe there will be a political price in 2026 for that. Maybe this will up the rage and the resistance, because people are paying attention. So that's good news. I found these legal decisions very dispiriting. Since we're counting on the courts, I really think a lot of these sort of, Aileen Cannon-esque Trump operative judges are doing their job and blocking and tackling for Trump. I think a lot of them are just coming up with any ridiculous legal reasoning they can, and really ignoring the fact that he is lying about these states of emergency so that he can amass massive extra constitutional power. It's so obvious. It's so obvious. If you and I can see it, obviously they should be able to see it. And that context matters.
It does. It does. But I don't want the audience to think that I've given up. I'm not throwing in the towel, but this has been a bad week. This has been a hard week.
You're not throwing in the towel. This is just the part where the trainer cuts the cut over your eye and puts the smelling salts under your nose.
Let me at him. Let me at him. I can still knock him out, boss. I still can.
And of course, the last thing that we want to point out from this week is he's still demented, folks.
Oh, yeah.
He's still dementing, like he's dementing. Okay, and so he can't even answer a simple question without babbling about something entirely irrelevant, and then we're all just going to act like we don't notice that the emperor has no brain. But at some point, hopefully the message will break through. And there was a little bit of that this week.
I think, look, there are currents and forces that will meet and resist, and he may well stumble. I think this bill was a terrible idea for his long-term power, and for the Republicans' long-term power. I think even the Democrats, who are terrible at this kind of stuff, can run some pretty powerful races. Look at what Shapiro said.
Mm-hmm.
They can really. This is going to be a cudgel for the Democrats, and I want us to support them any way we can when we get closer to the midterm.
Yeah, I would just like to cudgel them and cudgel them and cudgel them.
Oh, it's so terrible. What can I say?
So terrible. So it's been a rough week, but cheer up. It's like dementia. This could be the best week we're ever going to have. It's only going to get worse from here. No, I'm only kidding.
What they used to say, the best thing about Alzheimer's is you get to meet new people every day. Anyway, we're not rooting for Trump's mental illness, but he shouldn't be in office with it. He just shouldn't be anywhere near office with how he's functioning, both his personality disorder and his cognitive decline. It's really dangerous. And
he should be in jail or in a home for Don.
Yeah, I take either one.
Either one would be fine.
All this talk about Trump's seizing of power and how we're relying on the judiciary to push back, it led us thinking about what's going on behind the scenes. And our intrepid reporters here at Shrinking Trump were able to find the recordings of a late night call from Pam Bondi to Amy Coney Barrett. John, I don't think you've heard this yet, but we were able to get, it's a short call, but I got to tell you, it really says everything. Rex?
Hello? Well, if it isn't Mrs. Turncoat. Who is this? Let's just say I'm calling from the executive branch. You haven't been a good girl, Amy. What? Ungrateful, unpredictable. Who said you were allowed to go all independent? I have a lifelong appointment. Yes, and no. It is a lifelong appointment. It'd be a shame if anything happened to it. What? Nice to hear you and Sonia, Sodom and Gomorrah, have become friends. How many children between the two of you? Oh, 7. All yours. How are they doing in school? How are they doing getting to school? You wouldn't. Oh, I would. I've got the whole FBI in my pocket. And it feels good, if you know what I mean.
Somehow I'm not surprised that it feels good.
Well, and I'm not surprised that they're leaning on Amy Coney Barrett. I told you.
There's the proof.
There it is.
Hear ye! Hear ye! The court's in session. The court's in session now. Here come the judge. Here come the judge. Here come the judge.
Well, on Shrinking Trump today, we're very happy to have a special guest. This is Judge Black, who was recently appointed to the bench by Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump And we're glad to have him here today to answer some questions. Right, Judge?
No, well, thank you for having me.
Well, it's always good to have people from the other side of the aisle on the show. So tell me, what do you make of all these rulings against immigrants and declaring them free of due process?
Well, because they're not Americans. America is for Americans. What's so complicated about that?
Well, it doesn't say in the Constitution that due process is guaranteed only to Americans. It says it's guaranteed for anyone who's here.
No. You're completely misreading it. If vermin invade your country, you're allowed to defend yourself.
You know, whatever happened to American ideals? Like this land is your land, this land is my land. Like, whatever happened to that?
Oh, I'm glad you asked, because we're changing that. Hit it, Rex. This land is our land and is not your land. And if you don't like it, we'll send you to Sudan. From California to the New York Island. This land was made for us, not you. When walking on the Jesus highway, and I saw above me that endless skyway. If you don't worship the same God I do, this land was made for us, not you. The land is our land, it is not your land. If you don't like it, we'll send you to Sudan. From California to the New York Islands. This land was made for us, not you.
This really summarizes stuff, doesn't it, Justice Black? You're really going to dismantle the Constitution and our legal system. Yeah, so
and I've got the tool to do it. If I had a hammer...
No, just don't throw this at me. Come on, don't do it. Don't do it.
If I had a hammer,
all right, folks,
I could dismantle the Constitution.
Thanks for joining us with Drinking Trump. See you next time. Tell your friends. Have a good week.
This land is our land, not yours. Remember that.